Good morning, everyone. This is section 2, lesson 5 of the daily Bible reading. We're doing Genesis 38 through 41 and Psalm 11 today. So this is Genesis 38. Now at that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a certain Adullamite named Hira. There Judah saw a daughter of Shua, a Canaanite, and he took her as his wife and lived with her. So she conceived and gave birth to a son, and Judah named him Er. Then she conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. Again she conceived and gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Chezib that she gave birth to him. Now Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him in judgment. Then Judah told Onan, "Go in to your brother's widow and perform your duty as a brother-in-law under the Levite marriage custom. Be her husband and raise children for the name of your brother." Onan knew that the child would not be his, but his dead brother's. So whenever he lay with his brother's widow, he spilled his seed on the ground to prevent conception, so that he would not give a child to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, therefore he killed him also in judgment. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow at your father's house until Shelah, my youngest son, is grown." But he was deceiving her, for he thought that if Shelah should marry her, he too might die like his brothers did. So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. But quite a while later, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, he went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah with his friend Hira the Adullamite. Tamar was told, "Listen, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she removed her widow's clothes and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself up in disguise and sat in the gateway of Enam, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife, as Judah had promised. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a temple prostitute, for she had covered her face, as such women did. He turned to her by the road and said, "Please come, let me lie with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What will you give me that you may lie with me?" He answered, "I will send a young goat from the flock." And she said, "Will you give me a pledge as a deposit until you send it?" And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She said, "Your seal and your cord, and the staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and was intimate with her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and left and removed her veil and put on her widow's clothing. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, to get his pledge back from the woman, he was unable to find her. He asked the men of that place, "Where is the temple prostitute who was by the roadside of Enam?" They said, "There was no prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." And also the local men said, "There was no prostitute around here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep the pledge articles for herself, otherwise we will be a laughingstock, searching everywhere for her. After all, I sent this young goat, but you did not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the role of a prostitute, and she is with child because of her immorality." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned to death as punishment." While she was being brought out, she took the things Judah had given her and sent them along with a message to her father-in-law, saying, "I am with child by the man to whom these articles belong." And she added, "Please examine them carefully and see clearly to whom these things belong, the seal and the cord and the staff." Judah recognized the articles and said, "She has been more righteous in this matter than I have, because I did not give her to my son Shelah, as I had promised." And Judah did not have intimate relations with her again. Now when the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one baby put out its hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a scarlet thread on it, saying, "This one was born first." But he pulled back his hand, and his brother was born first. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself, to be the firstborn." So he was named Perez, breach breaking forth. Afterward his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, was born, and was named Sarah, brightness. Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the Egyptian officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the royal guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he even though a slave, became a successful and prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper, succeed in his hand. So Joseph pleased Potiphar and found favor in his sight, and he served him as his personal servant. He made Joseph overseer of his house, and he put all that he owned in Joseph's charge. It happened that from the time that he made Joseph overseer in his house and put him in charge over all that he owned, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. So the Lord's blessing was on everything that Potiphar owned in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left all that he owned in Joseph's charge. And with Joseph there, he did not need to pay attention to anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and attractive in form and appearance. Then after a time his master's wife looked at Joseph with desire and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me in the house, my master does not concern himself with anything. He has put me in charge of everything that he owns. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God and your husband?" And so it was that she spoke to Joseph persistently day after day, but he did not listen to her plea to lie with her and be with her. Then it happened one day that Joseph went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the men of the household were there in the house. She caught Joseph by his outer robe, saying, "Lie with me." But he left the robe in her hand and ran and got outside the house. When she saw that he had left his robe in her hand and had run outside, she called the men of the household and said to them, "Look at this, your master has brought a Hebrew into the household to mock and insult us. He came to me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard me screaming, he left his robe with me and ran outside the house." So she left Joseph's outer robe beside her until his master came home. Then she told her husband the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought among us came to me to mock and insult me. Then as soon as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his robe with me and ran outside the house." And when Joseph's master heard the words of his wife, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. So he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended loving kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the warden. The warden committed to Joseph's care management all the prisoners who were in the prison, so that whatever was done there, he was in charge of it. The warden paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him. Whatever Joseph did, the Lord made to prosper. Genesis 40. Now sometime later, the cupbearer, butler, and the baker for the king of Egypt offered their lord, Egypt's king. Pharaoh was extremely angry with his two officials, the chief of the cupbearers and the chief of the bakers. He put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard put Joseph in charge of them, and he served them, and they continued to be in custody for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, both dreamed a dream in the same night, each man with his own significant dream, and each dream with its own personal interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and looked at them, he saw that they were sad and depressed. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in confinement with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so downhearted today?" And they said to him, "We have each dreamed distinct dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a grapevine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. Then, as soon as it budded, its blossoms burst open, and its clusters produced ripe grapes in rapid succession. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and present you in public and restore you to your position, and you will again put Pharaoh's cup into his hand just as you did when you were his cupbearer. Only think of me when it goes well with you, and please show me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh to get me out of this house. For in fact I was taken from the land of the Hebrews by unlawful force, and even here I have done nothing for which they should put me in the dungeon." When the chief baker saw the interpretation of the dream was good, he said to Joseph, "I also dreamed, and in my dream there were 3 cake baskets on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds of the prey were eating these foods out of the baskets on my head." Joseph answered, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and will hang you on a tree, gallows pole, and you will not so much as be given a burial, but the birds will eat your flesh." Now on the 3rd day, which was the Pharaoh's birthday, he released the 2 men from prison and made a feast for all of his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker, that is, presented them in public among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and the cupbearer once again put the cup in Pharaoh's hands. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted the meaning of the dreams to them. Yet even after all of that, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot all about him. Genesis 41. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And lo, there came up of the Nile 7 healthy cows, sleek and handsome and fat, and they grazed in the reed grass in the marshy pasture. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them of the Nile, ugly, gaunt, and raw-boned, and stood by the fat cows on the bank of the Nile. Then the ugly and gaunt and raw-boned cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears of grain, thin and dried up by the east wind, sprouted after them. Then the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke again, and it was a dream. So when morning came, his spirit was troubled and disturbed, and he sent and called for all the magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them to him. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, "I would mention my faults today. 2 years ago Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We dreamed a dream on the same night, and each of us dreamed according to the significance of the interpretation of his own dreams. Now there was with us in the prison a man, a Hebrew, servant of the captain of guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us, to each man according to the significance of his own dream. And just as he interpreted the dreams for us, so it happened. I was restored to my office as chief cupbearer, and the baker was hanged." Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when Joseph shaved himself and changed his clothes, making himself presentable, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it, and I have heard it said about you that you can understand a dream and interpret it." Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me to interpret the dream. God, not I, will give Pharaoh a favorable answer through me." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and 7 fat and sleek and handsome cows came up out of the river, and they grazed in the reed grass of the marshy pasture. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, very ugly and gaunt, just skin and bones, such emaciated animals as I have never seen in all my land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had eaten them, because they were still as thin and emaciated as before. Then I awoke, but again I fell asleep and dreamed. I saw in my second dream 7 ears of grain, plump and good, growing on a single stalk. And lo, 7 other ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. Now I told this to the magicians and soothsayers, but there was no one who could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The 2 dreams are one and the same, and have one interpretation. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years, and the 2 dreams are one and the same. The 7 thin and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and also 7 thin ears, dried up and scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine and hunger. This is the message, just as I have told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. Listen very carefully. 7 years of great abundance will come throughout all the land of Egypt, but afterward 7 years of famine and hunger will come, and there will be such desperate need that all the great abundance of the previous years will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, as if it never happened, and famine and destitution will ravage and destroy the land. So the great abundance will become forgotten in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe." That the dream was repeated twice to Pharaoh, and in 2 different ways, indicates that this matter is fully determined and established by God, and God will bring it to pass very quickly. So now let Pharaoh prepare ahead, look for a man discerning and clear-headed and wise, and set him in charge over the land of Egypt as governor under Pharaoh. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers and officials over the land and set aside 1/5 of the produce of the entire land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Let them gather as a tax all of the 5th of the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain under the direction and authority of Pharaoh, and let them guard the food and fortified granaries in the cities. That food shall be put in storage as a reserve for the land, as against the 7 years of famine and hunger which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land people will not be ravaged during the famine. Now the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his servants. So Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, a man equal to Joseph, in whom the divine spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since your God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and clear-headed and wise as you are. You shall have charge over my house, and all my people shall be governed according to your word, and pay respect to you with reverence of submission and obedience. Only in matters of the throne will I be greater than you in Egypt." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you in charge over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it in Joseph's hand, and dressed him in official vestments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and runners proclaimed before him, "Attention, bow the knee," and he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Though I am Pharaoh, yet with your permission shall no man raise his hand to anything, or set his foot to go anywhere in the land of Egypt. All class of people shall submit to your authority." Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zephaniah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, Heliopolis in Egypt, as his wife, and Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt to inspect and govern it. Now Joseph had been in Egypt 13 years, and was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph departed from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt, performing his duties. In the 7 abundant years the earth produced handfuls for each seed planted. And Joseph gathered all the surplus food and the 7 good years in the land of Egypt, and stored enormous quantities of the food in the cities. He stored away in every city the food collected from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph gathered and stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting it, for it could not be measured. Now 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, causing to forget, for he said, "God has made me forget all my trouble and hardship and all the sorrow of the loss of my father's household." He named the second son Ephraim, fruitfulness, for God has called me to be fruitful and very successful in the land of my suffering. When the 7 years of plenty came to an end in the land of Egypt, the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said they would. The famine was in all the surrounding lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread, food. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, do whatever he says to you." When the famine was spread over all the land, Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold the surplus grain to the Egyptians, and the famine grew extremely severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all countries came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because there was a famine severe over all the known earth. Psalm 11. The Lord a refuge and defense. In the Lord I take refuge and put my trust. How can you say to me, "Flee like a bird to your mountain"? For look, the wicked are bending the bow. They take aim with the arrow on the string, to shoot by stealth in darkness at the upright in heart. If the foundations of a godly society are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see, his eyelids test the children of men. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked, and his soul hates the malevolent one who loves violence. Upon the wicked, godless, he will rain coals of fire. Fire and brimstone and dreadful scorching wind will be the portion of their cup of doom. For the Lord is absolutely righteous. He loves righteousness, virtue, morality, justice. The upright shall see his face.